Working group on the status of libraries in Vermont. Today is the 18th of November. We are meeting on the topic of continuing education. And I just want to get a sense of who has returned from recess, if we have the whole crew here or not. Pull out my trusty roll call sheets. Let's see. Let me use a second color. That'll be good. Okay. Meg, Allison, you're here. I think. Let's see. Maria, Avery, not back yet. Jeanette is excused for the afternoon. Denise is absent. Christopher, I saw you in the chat thread. You're here, right?
I am here.
Awesome. Andy is popping in and out as he can today. Let's see. Kelly. I see Kelly.
I'm in the car, but I'm here.
Okay. Karen's excused today. Let's see. Susan O'Connell.
I'm here.
Awesome. And then I also see Wendy Sharkey is here.
I'm here.
Great. And for the afternoon session on the Department of Libraries side of things, I know Jeanette is here and Tom is here and Josh and April. And Lauren is still minutesing away over there. I see Karen. And it looks like Jonathan is here this afternoon, which is great. And anybody else? Tanya and Joy aren't able to be here this afternoon. Okay, so given that we've got kind of critical mass, we will launch into agenda item 9, Department of Libraries LSTA 5-year plan. Our guest today is Jeanette Schaefer. Please be kind. Jeanette is powering through despite having a bit of an illness. And before you ask, I did offer to do it for her, but she wanted to participate. So we're not cruel and unusual, but if I jump in, if she starts coughing, don't be surprised. I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette, our assistant state librarian, for advancement.
Thank you. Yes, and thanks for the nod toward the cold. That's why I'm kind of nasally today, so I apologize for that. I also hope that my huge stuffed Kong won't fail me because I have a puppy next to me, so apologize for that as well in advance. He should be all set. So the 5-year plan is what I'm here to talk about, and I hope you can see that. Am I sharing that?
Yes.
Okay,
yes, it's on the screen.
Yep. So the Library Services and Technology Act grants to states is the grant that gives us our federal funding. So the Institute for Museum and Library Services is our, up until now, is our only federal funder, at least in recent history that I can remember. And Tom, you can chime in if there's something different. We may be getting some funds from the U.S. Treasury as well going forward, some ARPA funds, but for now, the IMLS is our primary federal funder. And they fund us year over year through the LSTA, the Library Services Technology Act grant. So last year we received $1,069,000 in LSTA funds, and this year, the current federal fiscal year, we received just slightly more, $1,074,000 as well. On top of that, we've gotten ARPA funds through IMLS. Those are also through the grants to states, but those are special. And those were 2.1 million, just over $2.1 million. And then in 2020, we received CARES Act funds, which were administered through IMLS as well. So when you hear these major special initiatives happening, like like CARES and ARPA, those are usually, and we benefit from them, they're usually administered through the Museum and Library Services. So that's just a little bit of context. I am the LSTA coordinator, so I'm the liaison to the feds, and that is why I'm presenting on this today. So the 5-year plan is really our way to show the feds that we will use their money as good stewards of taxpayer funding. And every 5 years, we have to evaluate the previous 5 years and also write a new plan for the 5 years ahead. In the spring, I think in March, we had a 5-year review that was accepted. And then we also issued in, I think, the end of June, this was due, and we put out this new 5-year plan. And all of those documents are available on our website, and the link is right here. And if somebody wouldn't mind posting that link in the chat as well, that would be helpful. So I'm not going to go over this entire plan with you because it's quite comprehensive. It's 28 pages with appendices and everything, and it follows a pretty standard structure that is prescribed by the feds. So it has a needs assessment, it outlines goals, then we talk about how we coordinate with partners and other state agencies. We have an evaluation plan. It's all here. The things that I highlighted are the things that particularly pertain to continuing education and staff development and training. So we thought this might be a good idea to use this document, which we really should be sharing with the working group anyway, but to talk about it with focus on CE. So the way this usually happens when we develop this is we look at the department's mission. So what are our goals as a department? We look at what are the governor's priorities, and then we also make sure that we meet the purposes of the grant, the LSTA grant, and the priorities of the grant. And I just highlighted in here some of the items that pertain specifically to professional development for library staff, and also how the grant is intended to help improve library services and help librarians provide better services to the people of the United States, or Vermonters in this case, in our case. So every state has one of these grants. So that's just a highlight there. And it starts with, I mentioned, a needs assessment. This is a pretty dense section of the plan, and I'm not going to go over the details. I really would encourage the working group members to look over this document, though. So what it does, it takes a snapshot of Vermont, and it uses census information, health ratings, government information as well, and just compares us to the rest of the nation and sort of what the situation is in the state, the status quo of our state as a whole, but then also the status quo of libraries compared to other libraries in New England and the state. And not going to scroll here. I made these bookmarks so I wouldn't make you crazy scrolling. I want to point out the summary of the needs, the whatever 5-page needs assessment that they did. Oh yeah, we did have a consultant help us with this plan, so we didn't do the needs assessment on our own. The consulting company did that. So the summary of needs, you can see here, I highlighted everything that relates to training and providing training resources and providing consulting information and consulting services to libraries. So you can tell that half the bullets here in the needs assessment are connected to continuing education and training of boards and library staff and library leadership. And by the way, if you want to increase the document on your end, you can hit Control and then scroll forward on your mouse wheel. That way you have control over how big this document is on your end. Okay, so let's jump right into goal 1 here. We came up with 3 goals, one less from the previous plan because the goals are similar to what they had been in years before, but we consolidated them a little bit. and strengthen them as well. So goal 1 is strengthening libraries. That is really the priority of the LSTA grant, is strengthening libraries. And I'm going to read it to you. The Vermont Department of Libraries will support library staff members and libraries throughout the state by delivering relevant, high quality, and community-focused services that incorporate up-to-date technologies and are based in best practices in the field of librarianship. So what we do under each goal is talk about how the goal will identify a need and how it also falls into the purposes that are addressed by LSTA and by the grants to states priorities. So we have to make sure that whatever our goals are, that they fit in those 3 elements, plus they have to fit in what the state's, the governor's priorities are as well. So the needs addressed by goal 1 are that most Vermont libraries are led by directors without a formal library science education. And I think we heard that this morning. We have a very highly educated workforce in libraries, but they may not have necessarily had a library science training. And poor funding is also something that isn't new to this group. Poor funding levels for libraries negatively impacts the abilities for libraries to recruit and retain qualified library staff. So those are 2 items that connect directly to continuing education. So what happens, obviously, when you have a goal, you have to determine how do you work to achieve that goal. And in this format, we identify a project. So what is it that we do to meet the goals? And here, again, we have many projects under each of the goals, but I'm only going to highlight the ones that talk about staff development. So here's the one, project 1.1, staff and leadership development and training. I think the overview we had from Joy and Tanya this morning really said it all. This is what we do. This is our bread and butter, really, and we take great pride in providing the service and the training to libraries that may not be available in other places. And I really appreciated Bree talking about how this is available for free as well, which is sort of unique too. So professional consulting assistance is another one of our projects, and another sort of big thing that really is the flagship in my division in library advancement. So we have several consultants with their area of expertise, and whenever we meet, and I have this as part of CE and continuing education and training, because whenever we do consulting, it really is learning for the libraries that we consult with and the trustees that we consult with, but it's also really learning opportunity for us, where when we talk to all of you in the field and on the ground and see what's going on in the front lines, that also helps us connect to what areas of professional development and training we could really offer and that we need to offer, because there's a gap there that we're identifying. I also see consulting as really a networking opportunity. Bree talked about how important it was to connect with other libraries, and our consulting helps us to then connect up libraries with each other as well and say, oh, you know what, you have this situation, maybe you should talk to the person in this town because they have a similar situation or they have a similar budget structure. So that it's very much a continuing education area for us as well, even though it isn't naturally, it isn't called CE. So that's goal 1. If we talk about goal 2, enhancing access to information. Department of Libraries will provide Vermont residents with convenient access to relevant, high-quality information resources in formats that they can use for their educational, occupational, and personal recreational needs. Now, as you know, we mostly don't serve patrons directly. We do in the Able Library, but we don't really in our other work. We help libraries help their uh, support their services to clients directly or to patrons directly. So in this area, I want to highlight 2 projects. So project 2.5, library services to individuals with print disabilities. This, of course, we provide services directly to patrons, but we also see this as an educational opportunity. The fact that we provide services, we also train libraries and library staff on disabilities, mostly print disabilities, but we've also started uh, taking up other topics, ADA general, how to be more ADA accessible with your flyers, with your webinars and all of those things. So we're really picking up those services as well and doing more training in the area of not just print disabilities, but other disabilities as well. And then Project 2.6 services to underrepresented populations. These are populations like, um, of course, people of color, people in different different various economic strata as well. And then also LGBTQ communities, the veterans and all of those groups of folks that don't necessarily feel that they're served. And we are picking up a lot more educational opportunities to bring to you to help provide services for underrepresented populations. We also feel like we have a strong network here where we bring all of you together to discuss how you can best serve underrepresented populations as well in our roundtables when we have regional meetings or roundtables and these topics come up. I feel like we provide the platform for you all to network and problem solve with each other. One of the examples there is, how do you serve people without permanent addresses? So the migrant worker population is a really good example. I know all of you are interested in providing services to them, and we have had these discussions in your networks at roundtables that we provide. So it's a little bit of an indirect way to get at this goal, but it's here and it is something that we really need to weave into everything that we do. So it's not standalone, okay, today we're going to do EDIA, but really in whatever we do, we want to weave EDIA into the educational opportunities that we offer. So goal 3, fostering learning and building community. Vermont Department of Libraries will provide libraries with the resources and training needs to help Vermonters achieve their occupational personal goals and contribute to the vitality of their communities. Obviously, this is what libraries do, and hopefully we can be helpful with that in the services that we provide to you or to libraries. I'm sorry, I'm speaking to you as if you're all librarians in the room, but you're not. So I should just really speak more generally about how we provide this to libraries. So one of those activities that we do is the summer reading program support. So we offer material support in both funding. So we offer a $300 summer programming grant to any library that wants it. And we also provide swag items, so posters and materials for the summer reading program, and also webinars and summer reading conferences just to help folks maybe brainstorm ideas and get together and figure out how to do their summer programming. So obviously summer programming is one of the biggest things in public libraries, and we provide support for that specifically. Also in the realm of youth services are our book awards, where we see ourselves really as again, a connector for networking and facilitating the book awards. We have the 3 different book award groups and the committees that we host and facilitate their meetings, and also make the books available and have a conference for the book awards as well, where we have national authors that speak. So there's some continuing education opportunities there as well. And thank you, Jonathan. I see that you're posting some links, so check those out. And early childhood literacy support. Again, our goal is to support libraries in doing this work. And so we don't really work directly with families and children through the department, but we help libraries work with families and child care educators, as we heard this morning as well from VLI. So this is one of our charges, is to support early childhood literacy. Indirectly, again, through the libraries. And Kathy, I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart. So if you would like to chime in on this bullet, you're welcome to, or on anything else that I may have missed. So just to sum it all up, these are the highlights of the CE and training and professional development that we do in the context of this 5-year plan. So happy to answer any questions, and Kathy, chime in.
You're doing great. I'm just going to sit back here.
Nope,
Keep going.
I am done. This is it.
You're all done? Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Jeanette. Thanks
Mhm.
for the overview of the plan. I guess just maybe a couple of comments. Most states do their assessment and their plan building with consultants who are independent, and the needs assessment is something that it can be really helpful to have outside eyes on, to help us to have a little bit more objectivity. They also try to put us in the context of the national framework, so that needs assessment is a really helpful element of our plans. So I do want to be sure that when we're thinking about, kind of how to identify needs, that we, as a working group, are aware that this important piece has been done and is done on a regular basis. So you could look back over time at the plan that just recently finished, or the one from 10 years ago. We have copies of those materials that are available if the working group was interested in them. So this isn't the first rodeo. It's something that kind of could be used in a longitudinal way by the working group. But I want to open it up for questions, and you might want to hear more about specific things that Jeanette talked about, or you might have other comments of things that you're surprised didn't make it into the needs assessment or the plan. The working group, this is your time to dig in a little bit into this resource. And we've got folks in the team who might be able to answer questions you have as well, and we could call on them. While you seem all kind of awestruck by Jeanette's awesome presentation, but while you're sitting quietly, I guess what I'll just share is that when we in the department are allocating funds for projects, and when we make grants to projects, they really need to fit into this plan. It's very important, and our folks at IMLS who consult with us, we will ask them at times, can we do this with the funding? Can we do that with the funding? In what ways can a certain project that's new that hadn't been on our radar when we developed the plan be incorporated into the plan in the best way? Or is it a project that we should be using external source of funding, or a separate source of funding that is kind of excluded by the LSTA funding guidelines? This particular, I want to clarify too, this particular program is the Grants to States program. IMLS has lots of different things that they administer and oversee. This is the Grants to States LSTA Act plan. And while all states are eligible to receive funds, there are situations in which, from what I understand, that states are sometimes not given the full amount of funding, or they're given funding for a portion of the plan. So the plan that we've developed here was funded for the full 5 years, and I believe it was funded at the full amount that our state was eligible based on our state's population. If you look at some other states or at the District of Columbia, you'll see totally different amounts of money, but this is a population-based method that they use to distribute the funds. So that's just important to bear in mind, that part of why when we're doing our grant reporting, when Jeanette's like, well, we really need to know this, or you use the funding in this way, but it's not quite in the plan that we put forward. So let's try to figure that out. We have to be really good stewards of our federal funds in order to ensure that we're going to continue getting the federal funds. So if you see us being you might feel like we're more rigid than our normal fun-loving selves. And it's really because this is so important, and the compliance with the federal guidelines is so important to stay within, so that we can continue accessing those funds to administer the funds for the state. So I just wanted to share that, because this part of the evaluation, did we do the work well, is really looking at how were the funds expended. So this plan sets the stage for what are the types of things that we're trying for. We can add things in. We could remove things. We can make adjustments. It's not the easiest process to do that, but it is possible. So you know, we don't enter into that type of changing of the plan lightly, but it is possible to refine it. It's much easier to add things than to not accomplish goals that we set at the beginning. So I just wanted to kind of give that context, because you can also go online, and we can put this into the chat too, and you can see what was the last 5-year plan period and what does an evaluation of the plan look like. The consultants have been really helpful in kind of helping us to see, oh, you met this goal, or you said you didn't think you met the goal, but actually you did meet the goal. Like, you know, helping us to develop goals that are ambitious enough to keep us moving forward, and measurable and kind of smart enough for us to actually be able to gauge our progress with them. Christopher has been waiting patiently with his hand up. So Christopher.
Yeah, not at all. Kathy, this was super helpful, and Jeanette, really, really, really helpful to have that kind of higher level context, both for me personally as the director of Vermont Humanities, but also for the working group. We do something very, very similar for the National Endowment for the Humanities. So it's a 5-year plan. And we also have to write every year a year plan that sort of lines up with the 5-year plan, and we go through a site visit as well, and ultimately an approval process by the National Humanities Council in order to maintain our funding. But I love seeing all of the context, and I guess I don't really have a question so much as I think it would be great to see the previous one and to see how it's shifted. And if I did have a question, and I don't know if this is the right place to ask it or not, I would love to know, how does this grant fit into the larger funding pool plan of the department? Because I don't actually know how much of your budget comes from IMLS and how much of it comes from other sources and is used for other things. And I'll just say, by way of example, for us, our NEH grant is about half our budget, and it largely supports our staff, and we have to match it dollar for dollar. And the dollar for dollar that we raise to match it is what supports our programming.
Yeah. Yeah, for us, I think it's, and Kathy, jump in anytime. It is a big chunk of our funding as well. So 60%, I think it's 60% of our budget, right, Kathy? And a lot of it does go to salaries, as in most situations.
It's about a third of our budget. And thank you to Tom for that, because I was about to start flipping through my budget prep binder, which probably terrified everybody when that comes out. Something that is really, for me, coming from the public library management world, it's really interesting to look at the department budget and how it fleshes out, because part of what we need to show, and Christopher, this may be true with the grants that you get from humanities as well, but part of what we have to show is match. We have to show that the state pays some of the fund, some of this, and that we pay some of it. What we do, because the consultants are such important components of the service that we deliver, you know, their knowledge and expertise and their time spent overseeing elements of our grant programs and serving the community. There, we have kind of splits for some of our staffing in the department. So the state's funding doesn't go just to the 18 staff. Some of, not my position, not our executive assistant position, but different positions have different splits. So they're funded partially with the LSTA funds, partially with general funds. And then the databases are a huge component of the costs and always increasing. We do have one other source of funding that we utilize in the department as well, not federal funding. We have something called the Smith Fund, and we use that for youth services, programming support. So, for example, the summer reading grants will typically be used, we'll use the Smith Fund for that. So there are these 3 buckets, with the Smith Fund being the smallest of them. But it's interesting when we're thinking about the things that we provide to the folks in the community, some of the things that people can use statewide, like the databases, are actually quite expensive and eat up quite a lot of this funding. It sounds like a lot of money, but when you start looking at the costs of those services, it doesn't go that far.
Yeah, $1 million is all of a sudden not that much money anymore. And Christopher, you said you had a 1-to-1 match requirement. We have 50%, approximately 50% of a match requirement for us, so it's a little bit less stringent.
And is that, Jeanette, that's state funding that provides that match?
It can be Smith as well.
Okay.
It could be
yeah.
anything that is not federal. Yeah.
It's interesting because, of course, for the Vermont Arts Council, the federal requirement there is that their 1-to-1 match is provided entirely by the state. And for us at the National Endowment for the Humanities, it's a 1-to-1 match, but it can be provided from any source. And so the state kicks in a pretty small portion of that.
Where did the other, just out of curiosity, what's the other source? Is it?
I go out and hustle. I raise about $650,000 a year from private sources.
My hat is off to you, Christopher. That's a huge lift. Yeah. This funding for LSTA, I mean, it's absolutely vital that we maintain it. There is a dream in the minds of state librarians nationally that one day we would get to a population-based formula that's $1 for each person served in the state. There is some growth plan in IMLS, but it's a gradual one. But once we hit a certain number, apparently IMLS national at the federal level won't be able to be cut below that. But we're not at there right now. And
will
it's true,
say-
Tom. A
Sorry.
$1 per population for us wouldn't really necessarily be positive, but for some of the larger states, I think that it's even tougher to stretch their money with the large size of their population.
I think this is a big debate in any of the networks, right? Because we hear this a lot, but it would really be a disincentive for Vermont, right? We would lose a lot of federal funding. And so Senator Leahy's small state minimum work has really benefited states like Vermont with all of these federal funding sources.
It's interesting too, when you're looking at, so I put a link into the chat thread that has all of the states' 5-year evaluations. And then I also put in the link that has Vermont's grants to states plans and the amounts. It's kind of fascinating to look at some of the folks who I would think need the funding just as much as Vermont. You know, we have, in addition to the 50 states, we also, IMLS also funds territories. So American Samoa, Federated States of Micronesia, Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Northern Marianas. There was a state librarian from the Northern Marianas who came to the recent national conference, and they're funded at a very different level from the states. And from an equity lens, that's somewhat problematic. But just to give you sort of a sense, if you do look at the grants to states program, I think that you'll see how, and I'm putting a link to the overall program, talking about how this funding throughout the country is kind of supporting and bolstering local funds for library services. And from the most recent link that I put in there, you can get to the allotment tables for each of the states and territories. Did anyone have questions about the content of the plan or the needs assessment?
I'm also happy to answer any questions if you read it and look at it and you have any questions after. Happy to talk you through it or answer anything you might have.
You're also quiet and off camera that I cannot tell if you're deep in thought or if you're ready to move to another agenda item. There's Wendy. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for coming on camera. It's one thing I want to note is that there are things that are interesting, and I think to myself, oh, how wonderful, we rank really well in this or really well in that. And sometimes it shows almost the opposite of what you think it shows. So there was a statistic that came out about how much we use interlibrary loan across state lines. And I was like, go Vermont, using all the interlibrary loan across state lines. Us in North Dakota, I wonder what's up with that. We're at the top, here we are. And it's like, wait a second, is that something you want to be at the top of? The patron wanted the book and you had to request it from like Maine, and Maine had it, but nobody had it in Vermont. So on the one hand, it's like, good for you Vermonters, you were thrifty, you don't need that book, you got it once in a while when you needed it. You know how to work the system, our libraries are trained in using ILL, but I mean, really, we didn't have the book in our state. So that might not be as good as it sounds at first. I'm surprised sometimes to look at the survey findings from the Public Library Survey, which is administered nationally and is actually separate from this funding. It's actually not linked with this funding, I just found out. It's like a separate activity, but still an important activity. But the thing is, sometimes we'll seem like we're really high in an area, and then when the consultants look at it in this plan, they look at that metric and they'll say, no, that actually shows something different than what you thought initially. So I would really recommend, if you haven't read through this deliberately and slowly yet, to do so, because it is interesting to see how we relate to other states. And what the consultants did on page 6, there's this chart that kind of calls out some of the ways in which, from 2019's PLS, Public Library Survey, you can kind of compare us with the rest of the country. And those are some of the things that they've put into the chart are the ones that are a little bit different, in which, like, our library visits per capita is actually quite high, which I think there's no bad side to that. Library visits per capita being high is great. Print materials per capita is one where you would think it's good, but it could show a lack of weeding statewide. If you look at print materials per capita and then you look at how much we're asking other states for their materials, it might show that. Of course, we don't know how old the materials are that we're asking for. If we're asking for books from 1968 on the moon, then I'm cool with us not having that book, but. It's interesting because I think we think of ourselves as being understaffed, and then you look at the full-time equivalent staff per population of 25,000 and we rank 9th, which is pretty high. But then you add in how many different buildings are there. So it's all of these things have to be looked at from a few different angles. And I think that the consultants did a pretty good job of talking that through with us. They helped us make the new plan after they had done the evaluation, and through the evaluation, they do interviews with the community served, and they take a very close look at things in the evaluative phase. So I do have a sense that the things that they highlighted in conversation with Tom, Jeanette, and I are good things to have highlighted in the assessment and the plan. Are there any questions or any comments before we wrap up with this item? Okay, well, let's move on to the continuing education topic, discussion of the working group. So everything we've heard today is fair play for a conversation, and even things we didn't hear, but we think we should have heard. I do want to, just as we get started on that, call people's attention to the testimony page. There is a piece of written feedback from Judith L. Kaplan. And Judith has been a school librarian, and she was a little bit late in getting her information to us, but of course we still accepted it. I do think it's important to read about it, to the point earlier today of, let's use the local knowledge and experience and expertise that we have. She shares about the NEA grant that was given to Vermont in 2020. It was called a Great Public Schools Grant, and it was $157,000 over 3 years. And they are in the final year of the grant and have trained 3 cohorts of seasoned school librarians. And there are 46 mentor coaches who have been working with 68 mentees during the past 3 years. So that type of model is actually now being looked at by others in the nation. Vermont's small but mighty. We've got good ideas, and it sounds like other folks from as far away as Oklahoma and Australia are interested in this work and potentially replicating it. So it also sounds like there is some consultation with people at Agency of Education to look at mentoring programs for other school specialists, maybe music teachers or other specialists in the school environment, seeing how they could potentially replicate this type of effort. So I just want to make sure everybody sees that, so that you get to have Judith's perspective as you're thinking about the topic of continuing education. So I'd encourage everybody who doesn't have something crazy going on behind them in the background, like you're at the zoo or something, to turn your cameras on if you're comfortable, and so that we can have a good conversation of the working group around what we've heard today and what our takeaways are. And just put your hands up when you're ready to share some thoughts. Susan,
I remembered to unmute this time.
excellent.
So I was interested in how a number of different times it was highlighted the idea that moving a lot of our continuing education to online options versus the in-person options were well received by people. That's not my own personal feeling, and I feel like I hear from other people who are frustrated by that. Of course, you hear the things that you already believe, so that may be a part of it. But I feel like today for me is a really good example of that. If I had gone somewhere for this meeting, I would have actually paid attention to this meeting for the whole time I was there. And instead, I had a staff member call out. I had 18 people at story time and no one running story time. I had a volunteer who was staffing the desk, but then I had another volunteer show up to put casters on the bookshelves, and it was chaos. And because I was here, I was interrupted constantly. So that level of focus, the level of intention, the importance that you can place on something, I think is lost when things are online. Not always, but often. And so I want to just counter that. I want to make sure that that perspective is also considered as we're looking at continuing education.
Thank you, Susan. Wendy?
Yes, and I'd come in from the other side and say part of Bree's testimony was saying how she thoroughly enjoyed having the cohorts to actually meet in person, to make the contacts, to make the to get the support of peers to continue to improve. And she found that to be an important part of it rather than doing it online. So that's the other side of that bit. I think that really points to the fact that there are pros and cons no matter which way you do it. And you have to balance the two, I guess.
Just as host of so many of the trainings, anecdotally, I've heard that we are serving many more people and from a wider geographic area. But I would like to see the numbers over time to see if the numbers align with that. It does seem like to some extent, we all learn in different ways, so there may not be one way that fits everyone. One benefit of the type of online training is that I can easily say, oh, you didn't get here to Montpelier on this day. Well, guess what? You can watch the video and you still get all of this great content and hear kind of the dialogue that was going on. Yesterday when I was out in Essex and Orleans County talking with members of the legislature and saying, there are these opportunities that we've had for people to take classes about ADA accessibility and libraries and things like that. And they knew that they hadn't seen that and that the librarians hadn't seen it. They could just watch the video so that the content gets out there. So there may be things even for an in-person training that you want to somehow, I think in some ways the hybrid and having the recording would be the gold standard. And then if we could do that. And it could be that for continuing education, it might be a good idea to look at some of the success with the First Wednesdays program and how in some months of the year, Christopher and the library, the team at Humanities and the libraries involved, they have some programs in person. Some of the programs are hybrid, but then in the winter months, they're not encouraging people to go driving through snowstorms to see the programs. So there may be something that we evolve to, but it's certainly good to think about the perspectives. I'm going to be honest, it would be a heck of a lot easier for me to run these meetings in person and have you all seeing each other's faces and be able to have a flipboard and we're writing important things on it than me trying to, with my little notepad, keep track of what all we're talking about and then having to look through the whole minutes each time. So, I think, you know, we evolved into a largely only online, and it sounds like we should be considering what the best way to do things is. I can't remember who had their hand up next, Christopher or Meg.
I think it was Kelly, actually.
Oh my gosh, Kelly doesn't have her face on the screen, and so I didn't even notice her little hand. Okay, Kelly.
Okay, there's my little face. I'm sorry. So I have a couple of things to say. One, I want to apologize that I did not have my testimony ready. As you may hear in my voice, I'm sick and I've been sick going on 4 weeks now. I have 2 testimonies written up, neither one of which is very cohesive. So I'm happy to submit it once, like I said, it's makes more sense. But a lot of the points were brought up today. Bree brought up the point about how there is a little bit of friction between those who have a master's in library science and those who don't. We need to remember that I wouldn't be doing my job as president if VLA offers in-person continuing education. And as was mentioned earlier, we are partnering with VISLA this year to do a joint conference, which we're really excited about. And that's a great way to network and to see people. And I know a lot of people were disappointed that we had an unconference last year, but we felt, considering the workload that everybody had, no one was really in a place to be able to prepare presentations. So it went really well. And I actually, one of the things that I talked about in one of my writing pieces was that I had sat in and Ditching Dewey conversation. And it was really interesting to listen to the libraries talk and to hear about, like you think sometimes when you pull parts of a collection like your sci-fi or your graphic novels or whatever out, that you're highlighting that aspect of your collection. But then there was other people there that was like, well, no, you're othering it. You're making it less by not including it with all of the, the rest of your collection. And so, in short, we had a really great in-depth discussion. We decided that if you have less than 10,000 items, you can ditch Dewey. It makes sense. But I learned stuff. I've been in libraries for almost 30 years, and I learned stuff from that. So I think the in-person does hold some value, but I don't think it all needs to fall on the state. I think that there are other avenues that we need to remember and that we don't need to depend solely on them. We need to be willing to put in some of the work and volunteer and, share some of our own expertise, I guess. So that's it. If I talk anymore, I'm going to start coughing.
Kelly, I'm so sorry to hear that you're feeling so sick, and I really appreciate your efforts. And earlier today I said, maybe Kelly can do something. Don't do that. I'll do it. Ignore my email. So yeah. Okay. Thank you for prioritizing being here despite not being well. Christopher and Meg, who was next?
Might have been me. I don't know. I'm sick too. And I think that the whole world seems to be sick right now. And that's maybe it's a benefit that I can be doing the meeting from my armchair at home instead of standing up in my office. But also, I do wonder, like, shouldn't we all just be resting instead of being trained into? It's just on Zoom. You can show up anyway. All right. Putting that aside. I would just wanted to say I have really, really mixed feelings about live versus online versus hybrid, because I absolutely do see that there are many, many ways where online continuing education or public events are way more accessible to a much broader spectrum of people, and it's much more environmentally friendly. In a time when the climate crisis is real and we've really got to be thinking about reducing our carbon footprint. And I know that if we added up all of the miles driven by all of us in our rural places to get to all of these meetings in person, we would discover probably a shocking amount of fossil fuel usage that we never thought twice about before the pandemic. But now we have an opportunity to kind of reevaluate and readjust. At the same time, I do think pandemic fatigue is real, and people's willingness to participate in Zoom events is lower than it was. I think a lot of people sign up but then don't show up for trainings or other things, and that's problematic. I think maybe we don't do that as much when we are going to be with each other in person. There's a different set of norms around in-person meetings than there are Zoom meetings. And I think I could go on, but it is really a struggle for me because I see the access improvements as being very real. I see the environmental benefits as very real, but the community relationship, the community networking really suffers. And I know that if we were in a room together, I would know you all much better than I do having done this entire process online. And I miss that. I feel like I'm missing out on relationships that I would like to have be deeper.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And,
If I could just say one more thing, a lot of the work that we do around in VLI and in Never Too Early involves home daycare providers, and the ability, the access that online training provides to home providers is huge, right? That they don't need to leave their house. They don't need to get in a car at the end of a very long day where they've worked their butts off, drive an hour, do the training, drive an hour back home, get home at 10 o'clock at night. I think that's huge for working class early educators to have the opportunity to just spend the 1 hour rather than the 3 or 4 hours.
yeah. Meg?
Hi. So I agree that I like having a menu of options available for workshops or online coursework. I think the UVM sequence model which was pre-pandemic, was a great way to model in-person learning with a cohort, with on-site. It bookended being at UVM campus for the first and the last full day together as a whole class. You had your satellite cohorts across the state, and then all the other like Blackboard online learning opportunities and discussions that were embedded within the coursework. I think in terms of like, if we're looking at long range PD or continuing education, that's a great model to look for. I agree having a menu of events for workshops, but we have to talk about accessibility because, until like every last dirt road is equipped with fiber optics, is it equitable to ask Vermonters to access the online learning when, I know from being an educator in the district, not every house is set up for that. We've got students still driving to the parking lot to access our Wi-Fi during the pandemic, and mine as well is glitchy here in Moortown. So, if we can partner with the organizations and that are doing that work for fiber optics, that would be great. But I do love the in-person stuff. Jason Reynolds, right, Vermont Humanities, being able to go to Middlebury College and drive over the App Gap, with a friend who had a vintage Porsche that she's remodeling. That was a much better experience than listening to Jason Reynolds from my living room, so. But when we had Angie Thomas and, that was remote, all of our students throughout the state got to participate. And I know that was thousands of students that were able to participate. So I think as we move forward, it's obviously offering both. And just to clarify about the Vermont Mentoring Matters grant that Judy Kaplan in the report that you just referenced, Kathy, the NEA grant for $1,057. We're now talking in VISLA about how to make that sustainable. So any sort of grant money that we're getting, like that is a wonderful model, but we're discussing like how to make that sustainable moving forward to support that program, because we don't have the answers about that, nor the money.
Thank you. Susan?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, what did I want to add? I had something important to say when Christopher was talking. Just the idea that it's not an either or, I guess. I think the human connections that you get when you're in person are incredibly important, but you can do both. And Meg brought that up with the UVM cohort. And I did the same when I did an all in person Vermont certificate of public librarianship. And that was really important to me, to meet people and feel like I had a connection with people. But I did a almost entirely online MLS through the University of North Texas, but we had that cohort, and that cohort was incredibly important. And we didn't meet very often, but it was enough to provide that piece. And I don't perhaps have the same depth of friendships with those people as I do with the all-in-person people that I met with, but I have a support network that I wouldn't have had if it had been all online. So we're not going to solve all of this today, obviously, but it's I think it's good to remember that both are important, and it's not a one or the other.
Thank you.
Whoops. I guess I lowered my hand once already.
No, I did it. I lowered it because before I got all confused, and then April was pinging me, telling me that Teams now ranks the hands in order that they went up, which I don't remember that from the past. Again, I need continuing education on just hosting a meeting in Teams. One thing that I was, one thing that I think our team has noticed is that when we're scheduling some of the folks, it used to be more cost prohibitive. Like if we wanted someone from Massachusetts to come and do an in-person training, then we're talking about their time, they're calculating time for travel. Do we need to do a stipend that is high enough that they can stay overnight if we're planning a morning workshop? Things like that really start factoring into it. And thinking about, recently we had some trainers on ADA accessibility, which, the regional experts were out of state. And so bringing them in, or having programs with authors who we can't afford to fly them here, but we can afford to have them visit with classes or with libraries online. So there is something great about the reach without that huge cost. So the carbon footprint, of course, but then also it becomes cost prohibitive to fly everybody around or to have them driving. I am curious to see, one of the impacts of the changes that took place long before I arrived at the Department of Libraries, but if you don't have regional hubs, you don't have a regional spot that you can easily invite people to and do training. So we're always like, oh, could so-and-so host us? Which is it's a little bit of a different experience. So I'm curious about the impact of that, because Montpelier is in central Vermont, but it's pretty hard to get to from some places. So. Do you have any other thoughts or comments? One thing I wanted to share, I have this sticky note on my desk. Sometimes I have a sticky note that persists for like months, and I don't know when maybe it was when we were working on working with a consultant on the LSTA plan. The sticky note says that the national average of libraries that have a librarian with a degree, with an MLS degree, that the national average is, and this is for public libraries, 45.53%. The Vermont number is 15.43%. So about, I think 29 of 185 of our libraries have a person with an MLS Yeah, there are some that have many people with MLSs, but like at least one. And of course, my sticky note is kind of pathetic because it doesn't have a citation on the sticky note.
It's in the LSTA plan.
That's perfect. So we must have, we got that from someplace, and that's why I have this sticky note. So when we were working on it, that just struck me. I mean, there is, I've heard about the tension. And I have to say, as a person with the degree, today I feel the opposite tension. Like, well, what did I pay for? Like, was I so stupid that I took on that student loan right out of graduate school? I think it's hard for me to get my head around what needs to happen. Listening to Deb from the UVM school media program, which sounds like a valuable program, and we've got people in our group here who went through that program and who have taught at that program. You know, she's saying we need to make it twice as big, and she's kind of asking us, but the working group, we don't have the money to make that happen, and we're not the right group to make that happen. And how would that happen, and who else is getting the ask? You know, going to graduate school in New Jersey, I then just kind of became part of the New Jersey librarian group, and I got dumped into a whole professional development queue, and they sign you up as a member at large 1 year, and 5 years later, you're the president of some section of the Vermont, the New Jersey Library Association. It's like, well, how did that happen? I'm brand new out of library school. It sort of perpetuates itself, right? But the cost to make an MLS program at UVM with a dean and an ALA accredited school with professors who have PhDs and where they're training people to have PhDs. This is that would be a huge thing. And to even bring the current certificate program, there must be a reason that UVM's not going for accreditation or not eligible for accreditation. We didn't hear about that really today. I'm just seeing that there are a lot of things with very big price tags on them, and sometimes we have to just sit with something for a while and think on it. But this particular topic seems like it's a very challenging one to sift through. Some of what we've heard today, it's like, well, all of this sounds like a wonderful idea, but is there like a magic fairy that makes library school programs and then makes them affordable for people in state? Meg's hand is first, and it has a number 1 next to it. Everything April said is true. It has the number 1 next. Meg.
Well, I feel fancy now. Well, you just described my dream, Kathy. I have a master's of education with a school library media endorsement, and I've always wanted to get an MLS, except would have to be out of state, right? And then I have to measure, where do I want to take this degree? I don't plan on moving from Vermont, so the degree works for me, but it would not work if I suddenly had to move and go out of state. And so I think it hampers how we can also diversify our workforce, which is something that I think the library working group really needs to consider. I know it's one of the goals of the AOE. You know, right now, the VISLA has finally launched, I'm on the executive board, we finally launched our values and visioning questionnaire and survey to our to the school librarians of Vermont. And we're asking for an identity audit. And I have a hunch we're going to be overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly female, right? And we need to diversify our workforce. But the way that it's structured right now to certify school librarians, at least, you know, you're already working with people who are already here, maybe already with a foot in their door in the school system. It's pretty lucrative right now to get a school library media degree if you have a BA or BS and you're already in the system, because you can get an emergency license, your superintendent applies, and then you can get a provisional license that your school superintendent, has to apply on your behalf. So they're compliant with educational quality standards if they're not gone rogue, which we heard some school districts are in the smaller schools. Otherwise, if the process is followed, your school superintendent puts in an emergency 1-year license or a provisional 2-year license, so you can get your schoolwork in. And if you happen to work in a generous district that's well funded, that coursework is paid for by your school up to, 6 credits, for example. And so it becomes, it's a win-win for the school district. It's a win-win for the school librarian who wants to get their certification and continue to serve Vermont students. But it doesn't necessarily diversify our workforce, at least on racial identities alone, or getting folks from elsewhere. Because I would agree, Kathy, like if I had anyone in an MLS program moving into Vermont, if we had this amazing program at UVM, they might stay. And we have declining enrollments in our schools right now. It's a real crisis. My district alone is we are losing students. We're losing families moving, and we know we have a housing crisis. But if people were attracted to Vermont by an amazing MLS program or just an MLS program at UVM, it might entice people to stay, raise their families, their kids come to schools. That's the pie in the sky. I mean, that's always been my dream, because we cannot pay the salaries of lecturers at UVM. That's UVM's responsibility. As a former lecturer at UVM, we got peanuts to teach classes. And I got peanuts to pay. I'm putting that on record. I co-taught a course. I had 24 students in my course, and I made $2,400, right? How much was UVM making off those students who were paying $2,000 to $3,000 for tuition? And we were under, the sequence is under continuing education. And then if you want to get your master's, then it goes into the Graduate School of Education. So it's still, there's not a lot of resources poured into the school library media sequence program. It's under CE, continuing ed, and it's all like I said, if it's bookended, if the courses are bookended with one day on campus, it's usually on a Saturday. So it's not impacting like their regular school day, and everything else is through Blackboard. So they're getting a real deal and taking in money, from people going through this process. So I don't think it's on us to pay those salaries. That's on UVM. And, I'd love to see, the process continue so that we could become accredited. But again, I think that's out of our influence. We can only just recommend.
Thanks, Meg. Christopher and then Wendy. Oh, Christopher, you're muted though.
Still muted. Meg, I just want to, can you hear me? Okay. Meg, I mean, I know all this about UVM, but it's really important that we keep hearing it over and over again about the way that adjunct faculty is compensated or not compensated. I think that's a big deal. I was also just, wanted to bring up that as I travel around the state, talk to libraries, both now and in the past, I hear many things about the jobs that they're doing that they don't go to school for, that are not part of an MLS, even if they do have one, and that is nonprofit management, fundraising, building management, historic preservation, all of the things that librarians in small communities and historic buildings are expected to do that they probably never got any training for. And I know, at Vermont Humanities, we've been trying to reduce or eliminate fees that libraries have to pay to have our programming, and they've gone down quite a lot, and we'd like them to go down more. We'd like them to be free, in part because we're a way better place to raise the money for them than a local library is, right? They don't have those skills by and large. You're relying on your friends group to do fundraising at one bake sale at a time or one book sale at a time, and that's really challenging, along with all of the other stuff that you have to do, including, of course, managing your budget requests to local government, which is increasingly tricky, I think, for many people. So that's it. I just wanted to kind of get that out there too, that there's this whole other set of skill building, skill development that has less to do with the job of being a librarian and more to do with the job of running a small nonprofit in a community that is probably under-resourced.
Thank you. Wendy?
I wanted to talk a bit about the certification and the image that it has. One of the reasons that I'm going for my MLS now is because it's a required portion of the job that I want. I have got my certification. I have been doing continuing education all the way through. Theoretically, I am well trained, probably better trained than someone fresh out of school with no experience, because I've had 24 years experience. And yet still the certification is not regarded as being equivalent to an MLS, even with experience. So somehow the image of the certification, the process of it, or the overall image needs to be increased, so that, you know, you don't feel required to go out and spend the money to get an MLS. And I think that's down to, obviously, a director is hired by the board. So then it becomes the trustees, the boards, that need to start considering what's equivalent and what's not. So maybe that comes under the trustee training as opposed to the necessarily other training.
Thanks, Wendy. I mean, I think at this point, I don't know. I mean, when we just look at the sheer volume of the number of hours in a class, you know, what the department's position to do is to do continuing education and to provide kind of an entry level training for folks. But I do think that that in my experience, there's a difference between what we can provide. Again, remember, none of us have PhDs. Like, we can't take in the whole development of the academic program. And I think that there are different academic programs, and somebody might go to one and say, oh, well, this one, it's not any better than this other thing. I mean, it's very, I don't know. I feel like the work experience is valuable, and it's certainly, after working in a library for so many years, what does the degree add at that point for you? How would it change that?
Right. It's just the perception that the certification isn't good enough. So,
well, I don't want to step on any toes or hurt any feelings, but I don't think the certification program we offer, that if somebody just had that's exactly equivalent. I think the certification plus the experience you have may be what combines to something of the master's program level. But I don't, just credit hours wise, it's not the same amount of work and the same amount of reading and the same amount of education and instruction that you're receiving. I worry a little bit that we're simplifying things to the point that the degree is somewhat devalued. And I don't know that that's exactly the right thing for us to say either. I'd like to make the degree programs more accessible and more affordable. I do think too that there's an extent to which we may not even be realizing or promoting opportunities people have. Like, I was thinking about this earlier in the week when I was applying for graduate schools in 1998. Do not know if this is still true, but I remember at the time UVM had neither, I don't believe that they had a education media specialist track at that point. But they didn't have an accredited ALA degree at that point, for sure. And I remember I could at that point go to University of Rhode Island's master's program for in-state UVM rates. That was an option. So I think that there are things that may still even be in place that we may not even be aware of, that there are certain reciprocities that exist when your state doesn't have an accredited program of study. And
I
like
believe
to,
that's true.
I'd like to look at that a little bit more too, because I know, you know, like Susan was saying, the University of North Texas, is that the correct? And they've got the New England cohort, and that can be really, really great. It's also possible that there could be a New England cohort at a much closer location that we just don't know about, because when Joy Warland did some informal surveying of folks in the CE, you know, in the certificate program now, and nobody seems to be going to URI. And, you know, McGill is our closest accredited ALA program. It's not that far away. I mean, the border's been difficult during the pandemic, but we were unable to think of anybody who had availed themselves of McGill's program. You don't often see that. Susan.
I just wanted to say that the Department of Library certificate fills a specific need, and I think that's what the Vermont Department of Libraries needs to do. They need to train people specifically to run a Vermont library. And a degree should be much more generalizable. So once you have a master's degree, sure, you should be able to run a Vermont public library, but you should also be able to do a whole range of other things. And so they are different for those two reasons, and they should be different. And I don't see that the Department of Libraries should be looking at providing a more generalizable education. They should be looking at, how do we make sure that the people in our libraries have these specific skills?
Wendy?
Yes, I agree with that. I also think that I still think the certification program needs to be bolstered. The image of it needs to be bolstered. I think it's still not looked at in the light that it deserves.
Amongst library trustees, amongst librarians, where does it need to be bolstered, I guess is my question.
Well, I think with the trustees, the people who are in charge of who runs the libraries. So
I think, you know, there's the challenge that we have, which is, you know, what's the goal of the program? What was it, you know, looking back, thinking about what Joy was sharing this morning, there can be things that people in Vermont libraries want that may not be the role of the Department of Libraries at some points. I mean, I think that we have a commitment to providing continuing education, but we don't have any way to provide master's level coursework for an opt-in cohort. And I think that the work that Joy and the other consultants have been doing has been professionalized, and part of the reason that they do things like bring in experts on topics from out of state rather than like just learn a lot about ADA themselves. You know, if you think about something like that, you know, on the one hand, it's like, well, we could learn from each other. On the other hand, what we're trying to do is connect the library community with experts in different fields. I think it would be a challenge to do more programming or to offer more courses, to offer more classes than we're offering now, with more than one a week. If we had 63 workshops last year. So I think there might be a way to do to think about restructuring the program, but what is it that we're really trying to do in the program? Just going back to kind of the goals of it are really, you know, providing these foundational courses for people who may be brand new to librarianship, and we're trying to be sure that folks have like the basic familiarity and the entry to the field, not necessarily that they are we're not saying when you get the certificate program, if you finish it, we had somebody finish in a year recently, apparently. If you do the whole program in a year, that doesn't give you Wendy's, how many years of experience working in a library? So there's
24.
24. So that that's tough. I mean, I do think that there were things that I heard today that sounded like really good ideas, and I want to make sure that we think about them in this portion of our conversation too. The idea that there be some continuing education. If you get the certificate, and that's a generalist activity. Could there be tracks that you get more specialized in youth services or something like that? Or in a different, like thinking about the different tracks of librarianship, like having more of a reference specialty or a youth services specialty. Could there be continuing education requirements to maintain your certificate in the way that childhood educators have, or that teachers have? So there might be some areas like that where there's a continual engagement, because I think everybody that I see regularly, all the library professionals, whether they have a degree or not, the ones who I'm seeing at a director's meeting, at a regional meeting, at something like this, they're people who are all availing themselves of all the learning that they can all the time. They are like lifelong learners, right? They're going to just keep on coming in. They're going to stay current. But for somebody who kind of, it's like one and done, like, oh, I went through that 150 credit hours or whatever, and I'm done. It's over for me. And now I'll just sit for 35 years and check the books in and check the books out. Like, I don't know that we have tons of people who are like that in Vermont libraries. That's not the impression I get when I visit. But we want to encourage people to continue, not just in their one area of interest, but continue with, we've heard repeatedly that there's this need for technology training. When people say to me, I need more Josh, my answer is not, here's Josh, there's just the one Josh. My answer is, we need to do more technology training. If you think you need more Josh, how did a Josh get made? Sorry, Josh, to talk about you in this way. But how did you get someone with that skill set? What did he do to become that way besides just being special? He must have studied some things. Let's try to get those opportunities to other people. So what I've heard a lot in the past few meetings is, that we need more technology training. I've heard that we need more youth services, early childhood literacy training, that small cohorts are really useful, but we also need some general, like, get some principles of this out there to people and refresher trainings out there to people, and, getting people into the vein of understanding the concepts of that they are an early childhood literacy expert just by virtue of having done 100 story times. You know something there, and learn some of the underpinnings of that, so that you can really feel confident modeling and sharing and teaching people how to read to their kids, how to read to the kids they care for, and that the kids who are in their families. So I think that there are things that we're hearing, and I wonder, can the group talk about that a little bit? Where are the areas that we see that there's a need for additional training? And even looking at the presentation from Jeanette, did those training needs articulated in that plan match what we're seeing as the training needs? Like, I don't know that training, the LSTA plan, articulated the need for technology training that I observe, for example. Allison, I'm sorry, Meg. I'm getting loopy. I'm calling people by their last names.
That's quite okay. As you can imagine, it happens quite frequently to me. I was thinking though, like, why I don't have an MLS, right? But I have, and I went through the library media sequence at UVM, but I have a master's of education because those courses transferred into that master's of education program, right? So I'm wondering, in the Vermont certification for public librarians, if perhaps there could be a partner MLS program that would take a bundle of those courses and apply them towards an MLS, whether it's McGill or something else. So I think that's part of the appeal of the program at UVM and something that we could look to as a model. and the other thing that school librarians have is, there's education quality standards and accountability, and I don't know if that exists in public libraries, where a public library has to say, we have a certified public librarian, and therefore they're accountable to ensure that their staff is accredited and certified and that sort of thing. So that could be another layer. I mean, you lose local control that way, but then what are you gaining? You're ensuring that the workforce is getting the continuing education and the foundational knowledge that it requires. So those are just my thoughts on that.
Are there any other thoughts on this topic, or can I just ask you all, like, I mean, kind of going back to what I was just saying, are there certain things that we as a working group can agree we need more focus on training wise, like technology, or like, maybe a show of hands, like it's not a vote, there's no money that we're allocating here, but do people put your hand in the air if you think that we need to spend more energy or resources or time on technology training? Okay. So that seems like a good one. And then let's put our hands down again. And then how about more training for on the topic of early childhood literacy? Susan, I'm lowering your hand so you can put it up again. Okay. Christopher, do you have an idea of something else we could train on?
I'll go back to my earlier one of just general nonprofit management, I think is important. And there are opportunities not connected to FitLib or to this system that maybe librarians don't know about, right? Through Common Good Vermont and other places. Some of those courses do exist, and I think Champlain College has some work as well.
Are there other ideas? I saw nodding heads on that one, so I think we can put that on the list. Susan?
Adult literacy. We have fairly poor graduation rate from high school. That's down to literacy. So I'd say adult literacy would be
I wonder if we could look at a mentorship program for more advanced librarians. I was thinking about that. Bree was talking about being a mentor now and seeing her cohort of people offering to be mentors. And I think it's fantastic that Joy has started this mentorship program. But who do those mentors go to? It came up for me because I spent 2 hours yesterday with a woman who I'm lucky to have as a mentor, simply because I asked her to be. And whenever I need to talk all about me and my ideas and what I think about the library, she'll listen and talk, and it's fantastic. But that's just informal. Is there a way that we could formalize that as either a peer-to-peer mentorship, or who would those mentors be for those higher level mentees? We might not have enough people to be those mentors, but a peer-to-peer mentorship could work for that. Something so there was still that exchange of ideas.
I think that's a great idea, Susan.
Meg?
For other course ideas, it could be something around like preparing for pushback. This is just really fraught times, and libraries have become sites of book banning, censorship conversations. And so how to prepare, make sure your policies and procedures had been reviewed, have those on board. Those sort of things might be valuable, as well as just sort of trauma-informed library practices. I think it'd be really helpful thinking about social emotional learning, the needs of the patrons coming in, the library really serves so many people from our community.
Reminds me of a training that some of our youth services librarians took at San Francisco Public Library, which is called Touch Points training, which was really, they did the program with a focus on meeting families where they were with regards to literacy and use of the library. Sometimes things can be very do this, don't do this, kind of. Sometimes things in the library universe come off as a little judgmental rather than welcoming and like, oh, here's where you're at right now. And then how can I give you some building blocks from here and make you feel comfortable in the space and comfortable working with us and continuing to come back in. And it was always interesting because the teams of people who had gone to the individuals rather, who had gone to touch point training, then when they were managing, were actually applying the same principles that they learned around early childhood literacy to like supporting their staff and their staff development and kind of just being more comfortable with when somebody's not like meeting the standard, really kind of reaching them where they are instead of scolding them for not being at that point. Sort of bringing people along from where they are in the continuum. So I had a lot of positive feedback that I heard from folks about touch point training. Whenever I would say, where did you learn this wonderful technique? They'd be like, touch point training. So that might be something we could look at too.
Catherine, that just makes me think that one possible role for some of us could be collating all of those training opportunities and how to access them in one place, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel of what Comic Book Legal Defense Fund and ACLU are doing around book challenges, but we could promote them more and make sure they're more accessible to Vermont librarians.
Yeah. It's interesting too, we do, during the pandemic, the department started these kind of digests, or is what I call them, but they're like, the twice a week emails with resources. And they're so rich in content about everything that's happening, but then it still seems like people it's like they have to be at the right moment at the right time when that's one email comes in front of them. And there are so many resources and we're all sharing them, but that doesn't mean that we actually sign up for them and take them. And in some ways, I think as a department, having a focus on a certain type of training and just like really messaging out on that as like a professional development theme for a period of time might be an approach we could take too. But
the fire hose is really overwhelming.
Yeah. And it's distracting. It's like when I'm trying to pull together my weekly reports to the Agency of Administration, I often look at those and I'm like, oh my God, look at all the great stuff that I missed. I missed everything. All of these things I'm interested in. Susan?
Sometimes looking at all those things that you could be doing it's an energy drain. It's just kind of this like, oh, all these things that I'm not yet doing. Whereas again, just going back to my own experience, meeting with my mentor yesterday, many of those things that I have seen and gone, oh, well now instead after that discussion and that talk and that one-on-one connection, I'm going, oh, I could, and what if I did? And it's a totally different approach to it. It's the same information, but I'm approaching it in a different way just because of that connection and that just that mentor relationship with this woman who, I'll never be a third of what she has done and knows and thinks. But boy, now I aspire to be once again, whereas 2 days ago I wasn't aspiring to that.
Well, it's almost like you have your own consultant, Susan, when you have a mentor who can help you see the bigger picture and narrow down what those specific skills or needs are for your own professional development, for your own library. Because I would imagine that any professional development that comes across your email chain, right, and you're thinking, how am I going to fit this in? That typically is happening out of work hours, on your own personal time, possibly as well. And so that's a big ask. Busy professionals as well. And if you're going to participate, it's then, finding someone to cover your time in the library, and that, we're all short-staffed as well. So that's I would say an additional challenge that even school librarians are facing, is the lack of subs and the lack of being, some people are not being approved to be able to go and participate in workshops and conferences, from what I've heard.
Yeah, it seems like training is the thing that kind of hits the fan when staffing gets tight. Let's see, I had made a couple of other notes. I just want to be sure we get them, the ideas. Just things for us to think about when we get to the point of making recommendations. There had been some discussion earlier about the idea of making recommendations around making recommendations to boards that staff be paid for time spent attending trainings. Particularly, I think, required trainings, because, if there are things that they need to know to do their job, then it's good to have them paid for that. And, oh my gosh, Lego Club.
I have a clarifying question, Kathy. So the
Oh.
Vermont, public librarian certification, is that available to folks working in public libraries free of charge to them?
Yes.
Great. Do you know what's the percentage of folks in public libraries who have that, or how many libraries actually have a certified librarian?
I don't know that I have seen that number, but that's a good number to try to get as well.
It'd be interesting to see,
Yeah.
because it is a free resource. And so what are the barriers that are inhibiting or preventing folks from having that certification, right? Is it just not, is it the fire hose and they just don't have that information, or it's just, are they not on the listserv, or, all
Well,
those
I
different
think
factors?
it sounds too, from what I understand from Joy, that the program had sort of fallen dormant, and so people who were in directors roles, that's who usually the requirement is on, is the director of a public library in Vermont, that they have the MLS or the certificate. That there were people who were trying to complete the program and there were no classes being offered. They couldn't complete at the time. So my sense is that the high numbers we saw for a couple of years, Joy said she came to the department in 2018, and I think that Jason Broughton had kind of tried to revitalize the program when he was in Jeanette's role, the advancement. So I think that it could be that there have been some challenges, and especially think about the pandemic, that maybe people have been trying to begin taking those classes. Josh Muse is telling us that about 90 libraries report hours for folks who have completed the certification. So out of the 185, about 90 have some staff who are working, at least one staff member in the library who has the certification. It's interesting. It's interesting to me. When I first moved to Vermont, I thought I would have to get the certification, but I didn't. Like, my master's counted for me to be the state librarian, but I didn't need to get the certification. In New Jersey, there's like a certificate that the state issues you when you show them your master's degree, and then you can hang it on your wall, I guess, like the dentist.
New York has the same thing. I thought the same thing. So you're not alone.
Yeah. I was like, where do I file for my certificate? And it's like, that's that's a totally different thing. Yeah, it's like they have to verify those states that require an MLS for any position that is called the librarian, they require proof of the graduate education through their verifying certificate process. So, are there any last thoughts on that before we move to our final agenda item today, which is looking ahead. There was a suggestion about a topic, and I had a question for folks about the January meeting. Were there any final thoughts on continuing education or? Okay, so let's move to our, I guess it's not the final one, it's the second to last agenda item, which is future meeting topics and dates. The first question I had is, it's kind of hard to tell right now because all these folks aren't here, so I may need to send out an email. I have a personal conflict on the 27th, and there's something I would like to go to, but in my family life, but can't, if we're doing the meeting that day. So just, I wanted to get a sense if other people could meet on the 20th instead. So for those of you who are here, if you could meet on the 20th instead, maybe do it a show of hands. I see Meg's thumbs up. I see Wendy's thumbs up.
What day was it? I'm sorry.
Friday the 20th instead of, I'm assuming that the Friday is working well for folks too. I didn't even think that we could switch to a different day. That didn't pop into my head till just this second. Oh, Susan's back from Legos. So we're supposed to meet on the 27th of January, and I was wanting to get a sense if people could do the 20th instead. Kelly, I think it's the day after a VLA board meeting.
Yeah, no, I can do it.
You can, okay. Christopher is saying that the 13th would work. But Meg is saying the 13th wouldn't work. Maybe I'll do a doodle poll or something because we can email about meeting dates. So I'll check with folks and see what day we get the most. Because we do have a bunch of folks who aren't here at the moment. And then the other question is something that came up. Trying to remember who suggested it. Meg, was it you who suggested that we talk about intellectual freedom as a separate topic with a whole new day? Maybe it was Karen. Karen.
Yeah, it wasn't me, but I think
Okay.
it's a good idea.
I don't think we can squish it into an existing topic, and we do also still need to hear kind of an overview of the collections topic. So we could do collections as the topic, as a second collections topic, and do like combining in intellectual freedom in that. But that would mean we're meeting 13 times. For those of you who are putting in paperwork to receive a stipend, the department's paying the stipend because we're trying to use the 12,000 for the survey, for one of the surveys. So you could get a stipend for the 13th meeting. That makes sense?
Either way
I guess
works for me.
I overstepped about the stipend. I came in on the conversation. But my thought on intellectual freedom, as a topic, and I didn't raise it, it's just that it's not open for like fiscal consideration. And so what's the purpose of the library working group? Are we making recommendations around fiscal issues or how resources are allocated versus a topic that, we want to unpack ethically, for example?
Well, I think that, that's a good question. I think that we have, let me just pull up our charge. I have it printed out. Because we're able to consider such a wide variety of things, collections. It doesn't say intellectual freedom as part of collections, but if we feel that intellectual freedom is important it's an important topic and that we should make a recommendation about it to the legislature, I think that the language here is broad enough to accommodate it. Because it also applies in the context of programming as well, like presentations and collections and the concept of intellectual freedom. And it seems like, it might be, I think that the working group could make a recommendation about best practices for libraries and if there was any recommendation about legislation in general. Our state doesn't have intellectual freedom legislation. But if the working group wanted to suggest that we look at something like that, that would be how we would do it, I think. It's certainly a
Put it
very
that way,
timely
Kathy.
topic. What?
Then I would, yeah, if you put it that way, I have to agree.
Yeah.
We should definitely make space for it.
Okay. Well, so what I'll do, we have a little bit of time before January. I'm going to be out on vacation next week. So probably the first week of December, I'll send out a doodle poll with an additional meeting date in which month we want to do that additional meeting in. And then I'll also survey people on the January dates that work best for folks. And if I'm the only one who has a problem with the 27th, I can, it's not like the end of the world if I don't do the family thing. I would just like to. So I don't want to exclude other people for my own personal thing. Okay, well, this has been a really productive meeting and I really appreciate everybody's attention. I appreciate all of you who came, even if nursing full-on illness or colds or anything. Thank you for doing that. I know it's hard to reschedule our meetings. I do want to share, if you're feeling terrible and you cannot come, please take care of yourselves. Please don't be a hero. If we don't have enough people to take action on things, we can always reschedule a meeting rather than have people work when they're sick. I just encourage you to let me know if you're in a situation where you're not feeling well in the future. I'll share that message out to other folks, because just because you can come to a meeting physically doesn't mean that that's the best thing for your recovery. So we do have a time sensitive body of work, and I appreciate that everybody's aware of that. But I also want you to be careful with yourselves and be kind to yourselves. And just as we're closing, I'm really, it's the season of gratitude here in the month of November, and Thanksgiving is coming up. And I just am really grateful to all of you for the time and the time and the dedication you're contributing toward this effort. And I'm appreciative of your institutions for allowing you to participate to this extent. This is a big time commitment. And I value the work that you're doing here in the working group, and just that we're all here to pay attention and to give space for people to share their perspectives on this important work it's really meaningful and important. And I'm grateful for you all and for the other members some of whom had to leave earlier, had to pop in and out or couldn't be here today, but I know everybody is really committed to this effort. And so thank you for that. And best wishes for a happy Thanksgiving for you, your friends, and your families.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.